in the deep reaches of space, far beyond the familiar stars of Earth's night sky, there was a small space station orbiting a star that had long passed its prime. It wasn't a luxurious station, nor a place for tourists. It was a research outpost, home to a team of scientists, engineers, and communication specialists who spent their days monitoring distant star systems, tracking cosmic events, and cataloging the faint signals of planets far beyond human reach. Life here was quiet, often monotonous, and filled with long hours staring at screens that flickered with numbers, graphs, and strange patterns. The crew had grown accustomed to the routine, and though they loved the thrill of space exploration, nothing prepared them for what was about to arrive. It started with a flicker on one of the radar screens. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a minor error in the system that could easily be ignored. But the signal did not stop. It pulsed again and again, steady and insistent. Unlike any natural phenomenon they had ever seen, this signal carried a peculiar structure, a strange rhythm that suggested intelligence behind it. Dr. Alina Morris, the lead communications officer, leaned closer to her monitor, her brow furrowed. She had spent years deciphering signals from distant galaxies, but this one was different. There was an urgency in it, a desperate tone that cut through the usual calm of space. She adjusted the instruments, trying to clean the signal from the background noise, isolating its patterns and attempting to decode its meaning. The room fell silent, the usual hum of machines seeming to fade as every member of the crew focused on the screen. "What is it?" whispered Lieutenant Raj Patel, the youngest member of the crew, his voice barely audible. There was an edge of fear in it, though he tried to mask it with curiosity. "It's a message," Dr. Morris replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "I don't know the language, but it's definitely a communication. And it's urgent, very urgent." The team exchanged nervous glances. They had dealt with strange signals before, faint attempts at communication from planets without advanced technology, or bursts of radiation misinterpreted as patterns. But nothing had ever felt like this. The signal wasn't just random noise. It carried purpose. It carried fear. The station commander, Captain Daniel Hargrove, arrived at the communications console, his heavy boots echoing in the narrow corridors of the station. His usual calm and authoritative presence didn't hide his concern. He studied the screens, listening to the beeping rhythm of the signal. "Are you sure this isn't a malfunction?" he asked. "I've triple-checked every system," Dr. Morris said. "This is coming from a planet in the Zalara sector, approximately 3,000 light-years from here. It's a warning. Something is coming, and whatever it is, it's a threat." The words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. 3,000 light-years far enough that it seemed impossible for them to intervene directly. And yet, there was no doubt about the desperation in the message. The aliens, whoever they were terrified. Something was approaching their planet, something powerful, something unstoppable, and they were reaching out across the void of space in a last attempt to survive. The crew gathered around the main communication panel, their eyes wide as Dr. Morris tried to translate the signal. The language was unlike anything they had encountered. Symbols shifted and pulsed in a sequence that didn't correspond to any known logic, but patterns emerged, hints of structure, phrases repeated with variations, and the more they studied it, the clearer the meaning became. The aliens were asking for help. They were pleading for aid against an enemy that would destroy everything in its path. "We have to alert Earth," Captain Hargrove said finally. "If they're asking for help, they're in real danger. We can't ignore this." But the message was more than just a simple SOS hidden in the repetition. In the strange cadence of the signals were details about the approaching threat. Ships of immense size, moving faster than anything the crew had ever tracked. Weapons capable of planetary destruction. The aliens described the invaders as unstoppable, overwhelming, and merciless. It was clear they had seen this kind of force before, or at least had knowledge of something far beyond the alien technology's ability to resist. As the crew continued to analyze the data, anxiety began to settle over the station like a heavy fog. The reality of the situation pressed down on them. They were witnessing a civilization on the brink of annihilation. It was not a distant problem, not an abstract scientific observation. They were watching a real-time disaster unfold, and yet, all they could do at this stage was observe and report. They were powerless to physically intervene, at least for now. Despite the fear, there was a sense of awe among the crew. The aliens' courage in sending a message across the galaxy, risking exposure of their location, was remarkable. They were reaching out, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. And in that hope, there was a lesson in bravery, in desperation, and in the universal drive to survive. The station, usually quiet and methodical, buzzed with tension. Every beep of a console, every flicker on the radar, every small movement of the staff was amplified by the magnitude of the situation. Hours passed as they worked tirelessly, trying to pinpoint the source and understand the threat. They calculated trajectories, estimated the speed of the approaching enemy, and tried to determine if there was any chance of warning the alien planet or coordinating a defense. Communication specialists debated the meaning of symbols and pulses. Scientists cross-referenced every cosmic phenomenon they knew. Engineers adjusted sensors to detect anomalies, and all the while, the signal continued, persistent and unrelenting. It was a lifeline, a cry for survival, and they could not afford to fail in understanding it. Outside the station, space seemed calm, cold, and indifferent. Stars twinkled in the distance, unaware of the panic unfolding in the small outpost. But within the station, the tension was electric. Every crew member felt the weight of the moment. The signal was more than a warning. It was a mirror of humanity's own vulnerability. It reminded them that even in the vast, endless universe, life was precious, fragile, and worth defending. As the first day of observation turned into the second, exhaustion began to set in. Eyes burned from staring at screens, minds spun from decoding sequences, and tempers frayed under the pressure. Yet, there was no room for surrender. The signal was alive, demanding attention, and failure to respond could mean the end of an entire world. Captain Hargrove paced the command center, thinking about the impossible decision that lay ahead. If Earth responded, it would involve risks that no one fully understood. If they delayed, the aliens might be wiped out before help arrived. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, yet necessary. Dr. Morris, despite her fatigue, felt a strange thrill coursing through her veins. This was the moment scientists dream of first contact, real intelligence, a glimpse into the unknown. But this was no ordinary discovery. The urgency, the fear, the desperation in the signal made it unlike any other first contact humanity had imagined. It was raw, unfiltered, and terrifyingly real. By the end of the second day, the crew had managed to extract a basic understanding of the SOS. The aliens were pleading for immediate help, describing the scale of destruction their enemies could bring, and providing coordinates so anyone willing to intervene could find them. It was the kind of message that shook even the most experienced crew members to their core. The reality of the universe, with all its dangers and mysteries, was laid bare. Captain Hargrove made the final decision to transmit the data to Earth Command. The message carried not only coordinates but a full transcript of the SOS along with the crew's interpretations. There was hope, but also fear. I hope that humanity could intervene, and fear that they might be too late. The small station, orbiting a dying star, had become the first point of contact in what could be the most critical rescue mission in interstellar history. And as the signal continued to pulse into the void, relentless and urgent, the crew understood that their lives, and perhaps the lives of billions on the distant planet, were now tied to the decisions of those who had the power to act. They watched, waited, and hoped that someone would answer the desperate call. Back on Earth, thousands of light years away from the desperate signal, the news of the alien SOS created an immediate stir among the highest levels of government, scientific communities, and military command centers. It started quietly, as the data from the space station trickled down through encrypted channels. But soon the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. Analysts, linguists, and interstellar communications specialists huddled together, examining every pulse, every repeated symbol, every pattern that might reveal the threat the aliens were facing. As they worked, a shared sense of urgency swept through the room. There was no time for hesitation. Every second that passed could mean thousands of lives lost on a planet they had never even seen. Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of Earth's leading experts in extraterrestrial communication, stood at the head of the table reviewing the transmissions with intense focus. She had spent her entire career trying to prepare humanity for first contact, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw, desperate fear embedded in these messages. The aliens were intelligent, their technology advanced in some ways, but they were clearly not equipped to handle the scale of destruction heading toward them. "They're pleading for help," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And this isn't just a minor attack, it's total annihilation. They don't have the weapons, the numbers, or the strategies to survive what's coming." Across the table, General Marcus Vahl, head of the Earth Defense Council, grimaced as he reviewed the data. The approaching threat described in the messages was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Ships larger than some of Earth's orbital stations, weapons capable of decimating cities and wiping out entire ecosystems, and an enemy whose speed and tactics defied comprehension. It was the stuff of nightmares. Yet the aliens were relying on them, sending a desperate call across space in the hope that someone, anyone, would answer. Vol's mind raced. Ignoring the call was impossible, but intervening would carry risks humanity had never faced before. The council convened an emergency meeting, bringing together scientists, military strategists, and diplomats. The room buzzed with tension, every person aware of the enormity of the situation. Debate after debate unfolded. Some argued that Earth should act immediately, sending forces to protect the alien world, even if it meant revealing humanity's position and capabilities to the wider galaxy. Others cautioned restraint, warning that a direct intervention without knowing the enemy's full strength could trigger disaster. Yet, through every discussion, one point was clear. The SOS could not be ignored. Innocent lives hung in the balance, and humanity had the chance if it dared to step in. After hours of deliberation, the council reached a decision. A specialized task force, one that had been kept secret from the public for decades, would be deployed. Known as the Deathworlders, they were humanity's most elite warriors. trained to handle threats that no conventional military could. Their missions were usually shrouded in secrecy, operating in the shadows where failure was not an option. The Deathworlders were feared across the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency. When they struck, nothing remained that could resist them. And now, for the first time, they were being asked to respond not to an Earth-based threat, but to protect an alien civilization entirely unknown to humanity. Captain Nathaniel Kane, the commander of the Deathworlders, received the briefing in a secure underground facility. He had been part of countless operations where entire enemy strongholds were eliminated with precision and speed. But this mission was different. For the first time, they were not striking to conquer, not to defend Earth, but to save lives on a distant world. Kane studied the holographic projections of the alien planet, the coordinates from the SOS, and the estimated trajectory of the enemy fleet. "This isn't a training exercise," he said, his voice steady but intense. "We are going into unknown territory. We don't know what we'll face, how strong they are, or what they've planned. Failure is not an option. If we fail, millions will die." His team nodded, understanding the gravity of the mission. Preparation for the journey took days. Ships were armed with weapons designed to obliterate anything in their path. Advanced shields were activated, engines calibrated for long-distance travel, and every piece of equipment was checked and double-checked. The Deathworlders trained relentlessly, running simulations of potential battle scenarios based on the limited data from the SOS. They practiced infiltration, assault, defense, and retreat, knowing that even a single mistake could mean disaster for the aliens and themselves. Yet, despite their fearsome reputation, there was an underlying tension among the team. Unlike any enemy they had faced before, these adversaries were unpredictable. The SOS had provided information, but the true scale of the approaching threat remained a mystery. As the launch day approached, humanity's attention turned to the public narrative. Officially, the mission did not exist. To the outside world, the Deathworlders were simply a rumor, a secret held by those in power. But within the Council, the stakes were clear. If the mission succeeded, they would save an entire civilization and demonstrate humanity's willingness and capability to intervene in galactic affairs. If it failed, it could provoke an interstellar catastrophe, revealing humanity's weaknesses and potentially drawing the attention of even greater threats. The launch itself was a spectacle of precision and power. Massive engines ignited, propelling the fleet out of Earth's atmosphere and into the vast void of space. The Deathworlders stood at the ready, their faces a mixture of resolve and determination. They knew the mission would test every skill they had, challenge every assumption about combat, and force them to confront horrors they had only glimpsed in simulations. Yet, they also carried the hope of a civilization that had cried out for help across the emptiness of the universe. That hope became their motivation, pushing them forward even as the distance between Earth and the SOS location stretched across light-years. During the journey, the crew of the Deathworlder fleet analyzed every bit of intelligence they had. Satellite imagery, cosmic scans, and the SOS data were combined to create a strategy for the attack. The enemy fleet described in the SOS was formidable, but the Deathworlders thrived on challenges that seemed impossible. They discussed tactics that balanced speed, power, and precision, ensuring that they could strike before the enemy had a chance to fully deploy. Captain Kane reminded them constantly that the goal was not chaos, not fear, but protection. Every ship destroyed, every strike made, was in service of the aliens' survival. As they drew closer to the alien world, tension among the Deathworlders grew. The stars stretched into long streaks as they approached faster than light speeds, and the unknown loomed larger with every moment. Communication channels were filled with updates from reconnaissance drones, giving glimpses of the enemy forces but leaving many questions unanswered. The crew knew that the first sight of the alien planet would reveal the reality of the SOS city's populations, landscapes all at risk of destruction. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on everyone aboard the fleet, yet, amidst the tension and fear, there was a sense of purpose. The SOS had awakened something in humanity's collective consciousness, the ability to act decisively in the face of unknown threats, to extend a hand across the void, and to wield power not for conquest, but for protection. The Deathworlders were the embodiment of that principle. Their reputation for total destruction was tempered now by the knowledge that their power could save lives, prevent annihilation, and perhaps change the fate of an entire civilization. In the quiet moments between navigation updates and tactical planning, the crew of the fleet reflected on the fragility of life. The aliens' desperation, encoded in the signals they had received, was a stark reminder that intelligence and civilization were not guarantees of survival. Even advanced technology could fail in the face of overwhelming force. The Deathworlders, trained to impose order through destruction, were now guardians, balancing fearsome power with the responsibility to preserve life. It was a paradox, one that weighed heavily on everyone. Yet it gave meaning to their mission. As the fleet approached the Zillera sector, anticipation built to a fever pitch. Sensors detected distant movements, flashes of energy from enemy ships far larger and more menacing than anything seen before. The SOS had been accurate. The threat was real, immense, and terrifying. Every member of the Deathworlder fleet prepared for immediate action, knowing that hesitation could mean failure. And yet, beneath the tension, a quiet excitement ran through the ranks. This mission would define them, prove their capabilities, and test their limits like never before. Finally, as the first distant images of the alien world appeared on the screens, the Deathworlders understood the full scale of the SOS city sprawled across the surface, their lights flickering like stars in the dark. The alien civilization was beautiful, complex, and alive, everything the signal had implied, and more. And above it all, the shadow of approaching destruction loomed, relentless and inevitable. The time for preparation was over. The moment for action had arrived. Humanity had answered the call, and the Deathworlders were about to demonstrate the terrifying precision of their power in service of life itself. The first glimpse of the Zallara system sent a shiver through every member of the Deathworlder fleet. The alien planet lay suspended in the void, a beautiful orb glowing with color, oceans shimmering under the light of a distant sun, and cities sprawling in patterns that spoke of intelligence and culture. But it was not peaceful. Sensors picked up hundreds of approaching vessels, moving in calculated formations, bristling with weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. The SOS had not exaggerated. The enemy force was immense, and the aliens on the surface were defenseless against it. Captain Kane studied the holographic projections of the enemy ships, calculating distances, speed, and potential trajectory. He knew that hesitation could cost lives. Every second mattered, and every move had to be perfect. As the fleet drew closer, the true scale of the Deathworlders' power became apparent. Their ships, unlike anything the enemy had seen, moved like predators through space. Sleek, deadly, and bristling with energy weapons, the fleet's formation was both terrifying and precise. Each vessel carried weapons capable of obliterating entire continents, yet the Deathworlders did not rush in recklessly. They waited, observing the enemy's movements, predicting attacks, and preparing to strike at the exact moment that would maximize efficiency and minimize collateral damage to the alien population below. The tension aboard the fleet was palpable. Every crew member understood that they were about to demonstrate the full extent of humanity's martial power, and the responsibility weighed heavily on them. From the planet below, the alien population watched the skies with a mixture of awe and terror. They had sent their SOS in hope, not knowing who might answer, and now enormous ships appeared, moving faster than anything they had ever seen. The atmosphere trembled as the Deathworlders' fleet established orbital positions. Energy fields shimmered across the alien cities, creating protective barriers where possible, yet no one knew if they would be enough. From their vantage point, the aliens could see the enemy vessels approaching. Their designs, alien, sleek, and merciless. The panic and hope mingled in equal measure. Their world, which had been on the brink of destruction, now had a chance to survive. Though the scale of destruction that might be unleashed was terrifying, Captain Kane gave the order to engage. The Deathworlders moved like a storm descending on a battlefield. Their weapons, far beyond conventional energy pulses or missile systems, unleashed torrents of destructive force with pinpoint accuracy. Enemy ships erupted in brilliant flashes of fire, crumbling into debris before they could react. The shockwave of destruction rippled through space, and the aliens below could only stare in disbelief. The SOS had summoned help, but this was no gentle rescue mission. This was overwhelming force, applied with perfect precision. Every strike was calculated to neutralize the enemy without damaging the planet below. The skill and efficiency were awe-inspiring. Lieutenant Zara Voss, piloting one of the fleet's strike vessels, maneuvered through the chaos with focus and precision. She fired sequences of energy torpedoes that disabled enemy ships' engines while leaving their structures intact enough to prevent fragments from colliding with the alien planet. Her hands moved instinctively over the controls, trained by years of simulation and battlefield experience. She glanced at the communications feed, which displayed the aliens' reactions. Fear, relief, and hope mixed into a complex wave of emotions. This mission was about more than victory. It was about survival. Every move she made, every shot she fired, directly contributed to lives that might otherwise be lost. The enemy forces, though formidable, were unprepared for the Deathworlders' tactics. Their speed and maneuverability were insufficient against the calculated, coordinated assault. Within minutes their formations broke apart under precise strikes. Shields that had seemed impenetrable flickered and failed. Command signals were intercepted and disrupted, leaving the enemy in disarray. It was clear that the SOS had underestimated neither the threat they faced nor the scale of intervention that humanity could bring. The Deathworlders had arrived not just to defend but to ensure complete tactical dominance on the alien surface. Scientists and leaders monitored the battle with a mixture of fear and gratitude. They had feared the worst when they sent the SOS, imagining themselves erased before help could arrive. Now, they witnessed humanity's intervention firsthand. Ships larger than their cities moved with unstoppable force across the sky, dismantling the enemies. The devastation was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The sky itself seemed to be on fire as energy beams lit up the darkness, leaving trails that marked the path of destruction. The aliens understood that survival came at a cost, But the alternative, complete annihilation, was far worse. Captain Kane continued to coordinate the assault, anticipating the enemy's moves before they occurred. He deployed small strike teams to intercept reinforcements and prevent enemy ships from regrouping. Meanwhile, orbital bombardment units focused on neutralizing large threats, careful to avoid areas populated by civilians. The precision of the operation left the enemy unable to mount an effective counterattack. Chaos reigned in their ranks as they watched ship after ship collapse under fire. The Deathworlders' reputation for destruction was no myth. It was terrifyingly real. Amid the combat, a small group of Deathworlders was assigned to protect the most vulnerable areas of the alien cities. Using advanced cloaking and shielding technology, they created barriers to absorb stray energy bursts and debris from the battle above. Civilians watched in awe as the invisible guardians ensured their safety, a protective force no one could see, but whose effects were undeniable. The contrast between the destructive power of the fleet and the care taken to safeguard life underscored the duality of the Deathworlders' mission: devastation for the enemy, protection for the innocent. The intensity of the engagement escalated as enemy reinforcements arrived. They came faster and in greater numbers, hoping to overwhelm the Death. But each wave was met with precise, calculated force. Captain Kane anticipated every move, directing the fleet with unparalleled skill. Each strike disabled multiple vessels, dismantled formations, and reduced the enemy's capacity to fight. In moments that felt like hours, the battle reached a turning point. The enemy's strength had been broken, and retreat or surrender was their only option. The SOS, once a desperate plea for help, had triggered a response that completely shifted the balance of power throughout the conflict. Communication with the alien population remained steady. Dr. Morris's early translations from the space station proved invaluable, allowing the Deathworlders to coordinate protection measures for civilian areas. The aliens expressed their gratitude in the only way they could, transmitting messages of thanks across the void. Yet, there was fear as well, a recognition of the overwhelming force they had witnessed. Humanity's intervention had saved them, but it had also revealed a power they had never imagined. The Deathworlders were saviors, but their capabilities were terrifying. By the time the battle drew toward its conclusion, the skies above the alien planet were littered with debris from enemy vessels. Smoke trails and energy burns marked the paths of destruction. The Deathworlders, however, had maintained their discipline, ensuring that the planet itself remained intact. Civilian casualties were minimal, thanks to careful planning, shields, and precise targeting. The aliens began to emerge from shelters, witnessing the results of a battle that had seemed hopeless just hours before. What had arrived as a swarm of unstoppable enemies had been met with an even greater, more precise force that turned fear into survival. In the aftermath of the engagement, the Deathworlders assessed the situation. The enemy fleet had been neutralized. Remaining vessels had either fled or been captured. Key leaders of the enemy had been eliminated, preventing any organized retaliation. The alien population, while shaken, began to recover and rebuild. Their world, once on the brink of destruction, had been spared through the decisive intervention of humanity's elite forces. Captain Kane surveyed the scene from the flagship, reflecting on the magnitude of what had been accomplished. This was more than a victory. It was a demonstration of strategy, power, and responsibility combined. And as the Deathworlders maintained orbit over the alien world, preparing for any last threats, the message was clear. The SOS had been answered, the invaders destroyed, and humanity had established itself as a force capable of protecting those who could not defend themselves. The aliens would remember this day forever, not only as the day they were saved, but as the day they witnessed the terrifying and precise might of the Death. And somewhere deep in the command centers of Earth, the Council and scientists watched the reports, knowing that the decision to intervene had changed the course of interstellar history forever. The battle had ended, but the skies above the alien planet still glowed with the remnants of destruction. Smoke spiraled into the atmosphere, and scattered debris from the enemy fleet drifted across space like silent reminders of the war that had just passed. The Deathworlders maintained their positions, hovering in orbit, scanning the planet below for any remaining threats. Every crew member aboard the flagship understood that the mission was not truly over until every possible danger was neutralized. The enemy might have been destroyed, but the consequences of their invasion still lingered. Captain Kane walked through the command deck, observing screens that displayed the damage in the slowly recovering alien cities. The enormity of what had been accomplished was overwhelming, but so was the responsibility of ensuring the alien survival in the hours and days to come. Below, the alien population cautiously began to emerge from shelters. Families stepped out into streets littered with fragments of buildings and scorch marks from the energy weapons. For the first time in what felt like weeks, they were able to breathe without fear of annihilation. Survivors hugged each other tightly, tears running down their faces, as they realized they were still alive. It was a strange mix of relief and disbelief. The SOS they had sent had reached someone, and that someone had responded with a force beyond their wildest imagination. The aliens had asked for help, and what they received was not just assistance, but total dominance over the enemy force, a force that had ensured no one could challenge them again. Dr. Lyra Voss, One of the alien scientists who had helped encode the SOS walked carefully among the ruins of her city. She had known the SOS might fail, that the message might never be understood or might be ignored. But when the Deathworlders arrived, the scale of the intervention left her stunned. The enemy fleet had been obliterated with a precision she had never imagined possible. Ships that had once seemed invincible were reduced to fragments in seconds, and the surface of the planet had been spared from the chaos above. Lyra realized that humanity's intervention was not simply a display of military might, it was a calculation of precision, efficiency, and control. It was terrifying, and yet it had saved them in orbit. Captain Kane and his officers reviewed the data of the battle. They measured the number of enemy ships destroyed, tracked the remaining potential threats, and ensured that no hidden forces remained that could strike the planet again. The Deathworlders were thorough, leaving nothing to chance. Every calculation had been made, every strategy executed with perfection. Yet even as they accomplished their mission, the crew understood that the impression left on the alien population would last far longer than the battle itself. Humanity's intervention had been absolute. It had been decisive. It had been terrifyingly effective. The aliens soon began to communicate with the Deathworlders. Using the limited vocabulary and technology available to them, they expressed gratitude that seemed almost inadequate compared to the scale of what had been done. Yet their relief was evident. They had survived a threat that could have erased their entire civilization. From the alien perspective, the Deathworlders were not merely warriors, they were saviors. They had arrived when hope seemed impossible, dismantled the enemy completely, and left their world intact. The aliens could hardly comprehend the sheer power and efficiency of the human fleet. What they had witnessed was beyond anything they had imagined possible, and yet it had been directed toward the preservation of their lives. Captain Kane reflected on the duality of their mission. The Deathworlders were feared across the galaxy for their capacity for destruction. Yet now that very reputation had been the instrument of salvation. Every weapon, every strike, every maneuver that could have destroyed entire civilizations had been applied with purpose and discipline to prevent loss of innocent life. The crew understood the paradox. The same power that could annihilate a planet had protected it instead. It was a lesson in responsibility, control, and the moral weight of overwhelming force. As the alien population recovered, scientists and engineers began to assess the damage to infrastructure and communications. Though cities were scarred and some areas were badly damaged, the main centers of civilization remained functional. The survivors worked quickly to restore power, communication, and transport, aided by guidance from the Deathworlders. Captain Kane authorized small teams to descend and assist, using advanced technology to repair critical systems without interfering with the aliens' own methods. The interaction was careful, respectful, and precise. Humanity's role was clear: protect, aid, and ensure survival, but never dominate. Yet, amidst the relief there was fear. The aliens had seen firsthand the overwhelming power of the Deathworld. They had witnessed the destruction of the enemy fleet in a matter of minutes. To them, humanity was both savior and terrifyingly powerful. Conversations among alien leaders turned to questions about future threats and the extent of human power. Could humanity intervene again? Would they remain protectors, or could they become conquerors? The SOS had saved them, but it had also changed the perception of humans forever. Humanity was no longer a distant race. It was a force to be reckoned with, one that could appear across light years with the ability to eliminate any threat with precision. The Deathworlders themselves were aware of this tension. They had not come to conquer, to enforce domination, or to rule. Their purpose was protection and survival. Yet they knew that the demonstration of such power could have long-term consequences. In the weeks following the battle, Captain Kane organized debriefings and discussions among his officers to review not only the tactical success of the mission but the ethical and strategic implications. Humanity had intervened in a foreign civilization's survival, and the message sent was clear: threats to those under protection would be met with absolute force. The challenge now was to ensure that such power was respected but not feared in a way that could create future conflicts on the surface. The aliens began to rebuild in earnest. They worked tirelessly, drawing strength from the knowledge that their civilization had been spared. Communities came together to repair homes, restore communication networks, and reopen markets. The battle's destruction was still visible, but the hope that had been restored by the Deathworlders' intervention gave them energy and determination. Children who had spent days in fear could finally play openly, while scientists returned to their laboratories to continue the work that had been interrupted by the invasion. The SOS that had begun as a desperate plea for help had now inspired a renaissance of hope and resilience in orbit. Captain Kane and his crew maintained vigilant observation. Though the immediate threat had been neutralized, the Deathworlders understood the importance of ensuring that no secondary threats emerged. They monitored the region for any signs of remaining enemy forces, piracy, or opportunistic attacks. Every calculation, every patrol, and every scan was conducted with the same discipline that had defined their engagement. Humanity's intervention was not reckless. It was precise, measured, and deliberate, ensuring that survival was guaranteed while minimizing unnecessary destruction. The aliens began to express their gratitude in more sophisticated ways. Messages were sent, gifts were offered, and attempts at communication increased in both complexity and frequency. They sought to understand the humans who had saved them, the technology they wielded, and the strategy behind their actions. For the first time, they began to consider the possibility of an alliance. Not out of obligation but out of genuine respect and recognition of the power and discipline humanity possessed. The SOS that had once been a call for help had now created an opportunity for connection between civilizations, one built on survival, trust, and mutual understanding. As the day turned to night on the alien planet, the skies were calm once again. The Deathworlders fleet remained in orbit, a silent guardian ensuring that peace would be maintained. Captain Kane looked out from the command deck, contemplating the magnitude of what had just occurred. Entire fleets had been destroyed, civilizations had been spared, and a message had been sent to the galaxy about the capabilities of humanity. The mission had succeeded beyond any expectation, yet it also left a lingering awareness of the responsibility that such power carried. Humanity had intervened decisively, and the consequences both for the aliens and for the broader interstellar community would be felt for generations. And as the survivors of the alien world began to rebuild, they carried with them the knowledge that help had come from across the stars, from a species capable of total destruction yet wielding that power to preserve life. The SOS had been answered, the enemy had been destroyed. The lesson was clear: survival, protection, and overwhelming force, when combined with discipline and purpose, could save worlds. And in that moment, both humans and aliens understood that the universe had changed forever, not through conquest or war, but through the terrifying and precise intervention of the Deathworlders. After the enemy fleet had been destroyed, and the alien world was slowly recovering, a profound silence settled over space. The Deathworlders maintained a vigilant orbit, their sensors scanning the horizon for any lingering threats, but nothing stirred. The immediate danger had passed, and for the first time both the humans and the aliens could breathe. Yet, the magnitude of what had happened weighed heavily on everyone. Captain Kane walked the command deck, reflecting on the events of the past days. The SOS had begun as a desperate plea from a civilization on the brink of destruction, and it had ended in a display of overwhelming power that ensured their survival. The lesson was clear: humanity had reached a stage where it could extend not only influence but protection across the galaxy. But with that power came responsibility, ethical questions, and new challenges. Below, the alien population moved cautiously among the ruins. For generations they had known the possibility of war and devastation, but they had never witnessed anything like the intervention they had just experienced. Entire fleets had been destroyed in minutes, with surgical precision, without the destruction of their cities. The aliens, who had feared extinction, now realized that the beings who had saved them were both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Dr. Lyra Voss, the scientist who had helped send the SOS, gathered her colleagues to analyze the aftermath. "They did not just save us," she said quietly, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "They demonstrated a force beyond our imagination. This is not just help, this is a lesson in power." Her colleagues nodded, understanding the paradox. The Deathworlders were saviors, yet the scale of destruction they commanded was enough to annihilate worlds with ease. Captain Kane had ordered the fleet to stay in orbit until the aliens' critical systems were stabilized. Power grids, communication networks, and emergency services were restored first. Specialized teams, using advanced human technology, helped repair damaged infrastructure while avoiding interference with the aliens' own methods. This delicate balance between intervention and respect became the guiding principle of the final phase of the mission. Kane wanted to ensure that humanity's involvement was effective but not domineering. The aliens had called for help, and now it was humanity's task to protect and guide them until stability was restored. Messages flowed continuously between the planet and the fleet. The aliens expressed gratitude, but it was mixed with awe and subtle fear. They had witnessed the Deathworlders' power firsthand and realized that while the intervention had saved them, it had also exposed the terrifying capabilities of humanity. Could such power ever be contained? Could humans, once present, decide to enforce their will in the galaxy? These questions swirled in the minds of alien leaders, scientists, and citizens alike. While grateful for survival, they had also gained a sobering perspective on the scale of human power, the precision of the Deathworlders, and the speed with which life could be both saved and destroyed. Back on the fleet, Captain Kane held a series of debriefings with his officers. Every aspect of the mission was reviewed: what worked, what could have gone wrong, and how the SOS had guided them to respond so effectively. The mission was flawless in execution, but Kane knew that perfection carried its own burden. The demonstration of total destruction was as much a psychological message as it was a physical one. Humanity's presence had left an indelible mark on the alien world. The Deathworlders' actions were not merely tactical victories, they were historical, shaping interstellar perceptions of human capability. As the aliens began to rebuild, the survivors began to ask questions about the humans who had saved them. What motivated them? Why had they intervened so decisively? And what did it mean for the future? The Deathworlders were careful in their responses. They conveyed that the mission had been about protection, survival, and a moral imperative to save lives. Yet the underlying reality that humanity could, if it chose, wield unimaginable power was not hidden. This awareness transformed the aliens' perception of humanity. They no longer saw humans as distant observers, but as active participants in interstellar affairs, capable of reshaping the outcome of conflicts across galaxies. Captain Kane ordered small teams to assist with longer-term recovery efforts. These teams provided knowledge, technology, and guidance to help the aliens rebuild in ways that would strengthen their resilience against future threats. But the Deathworlders were careful to avoid interference in the aliens' culture or governance. Humanity had saved their lives. It had not come to dominate them. The line between intervention and control was delicate, and Kane ensured that it was respected. Every decision reflected a balance of responsibility, respect, and the understanding that the aliens were now partners in a fragile alliance rather than subjects of conquest. Meanwhile, news of the mission began to circulate in human command centers across the galaxy. Though the details were classified, the success of the operation was undeniable. Humanity had intervened in an interstellar crisis, destroyed a formidable enemy fleet, and preserved an entire civilization without significant collateral damage. The operation became a benchmark for strategy, ethics, and power projection. Debates erupted among human leaders and strategists. How much force was appropriate? How far could humanity extend its influence before it risked fear or retaliation? The SOS had been a simple call for help, but its consequences rippled through policy, ethics, and interstellar diplomacy. The alien leaders, still recovering from trauma, began to formalize communication channels with the Deathworlders on Earth. They sought guidance, not control, and expressed the hope that humanity would act as a stabilizing force should other threats arise. For the first time, a long-term relationship began to form. The SOS that had seemed like a last-ditch attempt at survival had instead created a bond, a shared understanding, and a recognition of power, ethics, and responsibility. Humanity had demonstrated that it could act decisively, and the aliens now understood the value and consequences of calling for help across the stars. Amidst the rebuilding, survivors of the alien world slowly returned to normal life. Markets reopened, schools resumed, and families reunited. Children played in streets that had been scorched just days earlier, their laughter echoing against the backdrop of recovery. Yet, even in this moment of relief, the memory of the Deathworlders' arrival remained vivid. The sky had been lit with fire, the enemy destroyed with unimaginable precision, and the sheer scale of human power had left an impression that would last generations. The aliens had survived, but the universe had changed forever. Captain Kane remained vigilant. Even as the immediate crisis ended, he knew that the galaxy was full of unknown dangers. The intervention had been a success, but it also carried consequences. Other civilizations, observing the SOS and the Deathworlders' response, would now understand that humanity could intervene decisively, without hesitation, and with total effectiveness. This awareness could deter aggression, but it could also invite scrutiny, envy, or fear. Humanity had demonstrated power, and power always invites both respect and challenge. As the fleet prepared to depart, the alien leaders formally expressed their gratitude. Ceremonies were held, not with grandeur, but with sincere acknowledgement of the lives saved. Captain Kane and his officers accepted the thanks with humility, knowing that their role had been necessary but immense in scale. The Deathworlders had delivered total destruction to the enemy, yet preserved life for those who had asked for help. It was a delicate balance of force and restraint, and in that balance lay the true measure of their mission. Finally, the Deathworlders left orbit, disappearing into the vastness of space as silently as they had arrived. The alien population watched, understanding that their survival had been secured, but also that they had glimpsed a power far beyond their comprehension. Life would continue, rebuilding would occur, and the SOS that had once been a desperate call would now be remembered as the moment when humanity had intervened decisively to change the fate of a civilization. Captain Kane and his crew returned to Earth, carrying with them the knowledge that their mission had succeeded in ways far beyond simple military objectives. They had saved lives, shaped history, and reminded both themselves and the galaxy of the moral and ethical weight of overwhelming power. In the end, the SOS that had called humanity to action had not only saved a planet but had redefined interstellar expectations. That aliens, once terrified of annihilation, now understood the potential of cooperation, trust, and intervention. Humanity had shown that it could wield power without destroying those it sought to protect, and in doing so had altered the balance of influence and respect across the stars. The story of the SOS, the death, and the alien civilization would be remembered for generations, not just as a tale of survival, but as a lesson in the careful balance of power, responsibility, and the profound impact of a single call for help answered with decisive action.